Hi, I'm Orrin Whitlock. I'm 78 years old, and for a long time, I pretended I couldn't hear. Not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way I could protect myself. From my own family. My daughter-in-law, Evadne, whispered poison into my son's ear, emptied my bank account behind my back, and called it care. They moved into my house, told folks I was slipping, treated me like a ghost, but I heard every word. Even worse, they thought they could steal my legacy, but my late wife, God rest her soul, knew something, way before I did, and she left behind one last surprise, a will, hidden, untouched, for my granddaughter. Now, I'm just wondering, how long can they pretend they still have control? The ticking of the clock was louder than I remembered. It marked each second like a tiny hammer, tapping at the edge of a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The audiologist smiled when she told me it had worked, that I could hear again. The hearing aid was fine-tuned. My ears had responded well. "You'll notice the difference gradually," she said, placing a warm hand on my shoulder. But I already did. The hallway outside her office smelled like antiseptic and pine. I paused before stepping into the bright afternoon light, unsure why I felt like I was about to commit a small betrayal. I could hear everything again, but I chose silence. I didn't tell Evadne. I didn't tell Theron. Let's see what silence reveals. When I opened the door to the house, the faint murmur of conversation floated from the kitchen. I didn't move. Instead, I stood in the hallway, just out of sight, my coat still on, my hearing sharp and alert, the clang of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of Evadne's laughter. It was a familiar symphony I hadn't truly heard in years. But it wasn't just sound. It was tone. It was inflection. It was the way she said my name like it was something sticky. She couldn't quite shake off her tongue. I felt like a ghost in my own home. They hadn't expected me yet. Or maybe they didn't care. I stayed motionless, listening. "He acts like this place still belongs to him," Evadne muttered, her voice low but sharp. "Walks around like some relic. Honestly, I wish he'd just go live in one of those retirement communities and stop haunting our mornings." I didn't flinch. Not yet. A chair scraped. Silence. Then footsteps fading. I walked toward the coat rack, hung my jacket, and stepped into the kitchen. No one was there, just a half-eaten apple and an open tablet on the counter. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the table, and waited. The day slid into evening. At dinner, Theron tried to make conversation. Evadne smiled too brightly. I played deaf. When Theron asked how my walk had been, I answered with a practiced shrug. Didn't hear much. They believed me. They laughed. Evadne said something about how peaceful it must be, not hearing all this nonsense. She touched Theron's arm like I wasn't there, but I was, and I heard every word later. As I washed the dishes slowly, their voices drifted again from the living room. She complained about the bills, about how his pension barely covers anything, about how we're carrying him, and he just sits there, eating like a king. I dried my hands on a towel that still had my late wife's initials embroidered at the corner. MGW. Margaret Grace Whitlock. She would have never allowed this. Or maybe she would have. Maybe I never heard it. I went to bed early. The bedroom was cold, though I hadn't touched the thermostat. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at a photo of Margaret. Her smile didn't fade, even after all these years. I thought I'd made peace with her absence, but tonight I wished she were here, not to comfort me, but to witness this quiet unraveling. The lamp cast long shadows against the wall. I lay down without undressing, my eyes open to the ceiling fan spinning slowly above. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was sharp, charged, full of barbs. "If silence is what they want," I whispered, "I'll give them something to scream about, later." I closed my eyes, knowing tomorrow I would still pretend. But I had begun to plan, because what I didn't know then was that words weren't the only thing they were hiding. The last words I heard before going to bed, ugly and useless, still echoed in my ears by morning. But I moved like always, slippers shuffling across old hardwood, coffee percolating in the kitchen like it always had. The illusion of routine held firm. After breakfast, I stepped outside to check the mail. My breath fogged in the crisp air as the early November chill clung to the porch rails. There, nestled between a flyer and a utilities bill, was an envelope with my name on it, but the flap had already been sliced open. I turned it over in my hands. Nothing on the outside screamed urgent. No red stamps, no lawyer's mark, just a neat return address from a real estate firm I'd never heard of. Inside, a single sheet, a reassessment notice for the property. It detailed projected increases in resale value, referencing inquiries I never made. I looked up toward the window. The living room curtain shifted. Someone had been watching. I folded the letter neatly and slid it into my back pocket. This wasn't junk mail. It was a warning in plain paper. Back inside, the air was heavy with pot roast and pretense. I heard murmurs, Evadne and Theron in the living room. I slowed my steps and stayed just out of view near the staircase. Their words were hushed, but clear enough. "Well, we just need that signature," Evadne whispered. Theron sounded unsure. "What if he asks questions?" "All we need," she repeated, "is the appearance of it. Trust me, it'll be over soon." The floor creaked under my heel. Silence. Then a chair scraped, and the conversation ended. I walked in with a bland smile, feigned confusion about the mail, and asked for a glass of water. They offered it too quickly, too kindly. Later. When they left for a grocery run, I waited for the door to click shut. Then I moved. I started with the kitchen, working backward. Junk drawers, magazine stacks, the side pocket of the recycle bin. That's where I found it. A draft of a power of attorney form, crumpled but not torn, scribbled with Theron's messy handwriting and Evadne's notes in the margins. They hadn't even tried to hide it properly. My name was already printed. The signature line was blank. My hands trembled, not from rage, not yet, but from a cold certainty that what I'd feared had roots deeper than I wanted to admit. I pressed the paper flat and slipped it behind the encyclopedia set in the study, the one no one touched anymore. As night fell, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. The voice that followed sent a spike through my spine. "Mr. Whitlock, this is Mary from Ashland Notary. Just calling to confirm your appointment tomorrow to finalize the POA documents. Please call back if you need to reschedule. Thank you." I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. My appointment. I deleted the message. Then I went to the study and locked the door behind me. The room smelled of cedar and dust and something heavier, like memory. I turned on the desk lamp and pulled out my files. The deed to the house, Margaret's will, my military discharge. I laid them out like a map. They think I'm a ghost. They think silence equals surrender. But I built this home. I paid off its every inch. I raised a family inside its walls and buried love in its soil. They may think I'm old, but they forgot I wrote the foundation under this roof. I photocopied each document, slipped the copies into a manila envelope, and taped it under the bottom drawer. Then I took the originals and placed them in a shoebox, which I buried under the winter coats in the attic crawl space. Let them search. By midnight, the house was quiet. I stood by the window, looking out at the lawn I'd mowed for decades, the trees I'd planted with Margaret, the porch where Theron first rode his bike. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. "If they want my silence in ink," I muttered, "they'll need a forgery good enough to fool a ghost." I shut the curtains. What I found next didn't just confirm my fears, it made me question every hug they'd ever given me. The storm outside had quieted by morning, but the house still felt unsettled. The wind no longer howled, yet something heavier lingered, like the air had thickened with everything left unsaid. I walked into the kitchen just after 7. The light through the window was soft, but cold. The kind of fall morning that warned winter wasn't far. Evadne stood by the sink, rinsing out a mug. Theron sat at the table, absorbed in his phone, thumbs scrolling without thought. Neither of them looked up. Evadne spoke first, tone clipped, not unkind, just sharp enough to cut. "You should really label leftovers. Oren, I almost ate something that smelled like it fought back." I nodded, didn't speak, didn't flinch. They moved around me like I was air, there, but not present. a whisper in the corner of a crowded room. And that's when it hit me. It was November 12th, my birthday. I hadn't forgotten, not really, but I'd hoped, maybe foolishly, that someone else would remember. Even a passing happy birthday, Dad, would have been enough. But the day had begun with silence, and that silence said everything. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the steam curl upward. I used to mark everyone's birthdays on the calendar. Little hearts, smiley faces next to Theron's, anniversary reminders for Maeve and me. I even remembered the year Evadne's birthday fell on Thanksgiving. She hated that. Now, I was a blank square on a page they'd stopped flipping. Later that morning, I sat on the porch. The cold bit at my fingers, but I didn't care. I watched leaves skitter across the lawn, gold and crimson against gray cement, and somewhere in that quiet, memory took over. It was my 65th birthday, the last one that felt like it belonged to me. Maeve had decorated the kitchen with paper streamers and taped up a handmade banner. Happy 65. Love, it had read, each letter crooked and perfect. Theron had brought home a cake, store-bought, but proudly presented like it was crafted in Paris. We'd eaten together, the three of us. Maeve had touched my cheek and said, "You built this house with your hands. They'll never forget that." But they had. Now, even the walls didn't remember. Around noon, I grabbed my coat and keys, mumbled something about getting out of the house, and drove to the market. The cashier was a young girl, no older than 20, red hair pulled back in a tight bun. I placed a single chocolate cupcake on the belt. She scanned it, then paused, eyes flicking to my ID as I handed over my card. "Oh, happy birthday, Mr. Whitlock," I smiled faintly. "I suppose that makes you the only one." She blushed, unsure if she'd crossed a line, but I shook my head. "Thank you. That means more than you think." I sat in the car for a few minutes before driving home. I didn't eat the cupcake right away, just held the box in my lap, staring at the candle taped to the lid like it was a relic from another life. When I got back, the house was quiet again, too quiet. I passed the living room and saw a wrapped gift sitting on the side table. I leaned in. To Karen. "Happy birthday, love, Evadne." Karen. Her coworker. So she remembered birthdays. Just not mine. I didn't feel angry. That would have been easier. What I felt was something softer, more dangerous, a kind of numb that could grow teeth. I stood there for a moment, staring at the gift like it might transform if I looked long enough. But it didn't. It was real. It was intentional. And I was not. I walked to my study, opened the old calendar I still kept by the desk. I circled today's date in thick red marker, wrote 3 words beneath it. They forgot me. Then I closed the cover and stared out the window. I didn't expect them to change. I didn't need their apologies. But if I was going to be invisible, I'd leave behind shadows loud enough to be noticed. That night, the storm outside calmed, but something inside me had just begun to stir. That night, after my birthday, the air inside the house felt colder than what crept in from outside. It wasn't the chill that bothered me. It was the quiet, too polite, too careful, like everyone had agreed to a script I wasn't handed. Dinner the next day was Evadne's idea. She said it loud enough for me to hear, pretending like it was casual. "Let's sit down together tonight. It's been a while since we all shared a meal." Shared. The table was set for 4, me, Theron, Evadne, and Tyler. But the 4th seat might as well have been for a ghost. I lowered myself into my usual chair. The plate in front of me was filled with steamed squash, lentils, and something green I couldn't name. No meat. Not even a whiff of it. Just boiled virtue. "I figured you wouldn't mind," Evadne said, placing a cloth napkin beside me. "At your age, lighter meals are better anyway." She smiled. Too wide. The kind you give to a neighbor, you're hoping moves away. I looked down at the plate. This wasn't about food. It was about space. And who was still allowed to take it up? Across the table. Theron cleared his throat. Tyler reached for his glass of water. Careful not to spill. I didn't say a word. Instead, I chewed. But every bite felt like gravel, midway through the meal. I drifted into memory. I saw Maeve standing by the oven, apron tied around her waist, arms dusted in flour. It was a Sunday, roast day, pork loin seasoned just right, potatoes crispy at the edges, green beans with slivered almonds. She used to hum while she cooked, sometimes gospel, sometimes old Dolly Parton. Theron had loved those Sundays. Back then, he'd eat with both hands like he was trying to prove something. Maeve would laugh and scold him gently. "Chew before you choke, baby." I swallowed another forkful of lentils. No laughter now, just the clink of cutlery and the hum of the refrigerator. This wasn't about taste, I thought. It was about territory. I reached for the salt. My hand moved slow, deliberate. As soon as my fingers brushed the shaker, Evadne slid it away, saying, "Too much sodium's not good for you." "Oren," she smiled again, almost maternal. Theron gave a nervous chuckle. "She's just looking out for you. Dad." I didn't look at him. I looked at her. Then I set my fork down, leaned back slightly, and asked, "What did you say earlier today? Something about getting rid of the old wood?" The room froze for a beat. Evadne blinked. Excuse me?" I tilted my head like I was straining to hear. "Heard something through the floorboards. Might have misheard. Something about old wood. Useless. Needing to go." Her lips parted, but no words came. Tyler stared down at his peas. Theron took a sip of water, fast. "Oh, just talking about some damaged patio boards," Evadne finally said, her voice tight. "You know how this place creaks." I nodded slowly. "Yes, it creaks." We went back to eating, or pretending to. Then Tyler, reaching for the butter dish, knocked over his plate. It clattered. Porcelain against hardwood, a high-pitched ring that cut the silence clean. "Sorry," he gasped, scrambling to pick it up. I knelt to help him. Our eyes met, his wide and searching. In that brief, silent moment, something passed between us. Not words, something older. Recognition. Maybe the boy hadn't forgotten what respect looked like, only been taught not to show it. I sat back down, finished what was left on my plate, and excused myself. That night, I didn't go to bed angry. I went to bed planning. That night, I went to bed planning. The kind of planning that makes the air feel different when you breathe it in. Quiet, dense, deliberate. By morning, the house was still asleep. I didn't need the sun to be up. I just needed the key. I shuffled into my study, the one place that hadn't been rearranged, repainted, or repurposed. The drawer under the old roll-top desk gave a familiar resistance when I turned the lock, tight from disuse, like bones not meant to bend. Inside lay the bones of my legacy, the original deed to the house, paid off years before Evadne even learned how to spell mortgage, the homeowner's insurance policy with my name printed like granite, and a USB drive, black and unmarked, but not empty. The locks I trusted were made of paper, I thought, fingers grazing the edge of the manila folder. I needed steel. I placed each document on the desk carefully, smoothing out edges like they were still alive. Then I slid open the top drawer and pulled out the small black case, my hearing aid. I'd cleaned it the night before, checked the battery, and now I pressed the side button that switched on its hidden function. Surveillance wasn't something I ever imagined myself needing, but then again, I never imagined my own son treating me like cargo to unload. Later that morning, I set myself in the recliner in the living room, eyes closed, the newspaper folded in my lap. The hearing aid hummed softly, recording. Evadne's voice drifted in from the kitchen, sharper than a knife slipping from a drawer. "Just need the POA cleared. After that, we can refinance the whole thing. He won't know a thing." My hand clenched the armrest, the leather creaking under pressure. She spoke like I was a suitcase, something to be wheeled away and stored, but I stayed still. Stillness was my weapon now. Around noon, I stepped out to the backyard. The leaves had turned brittle, scattered like little betrayals across the grass. Mr. Wendell, my neighbor of 30 years, was watering his stubborn azaleas near the fence. "Morning, Oren," he said, lifting his hat with a friendly nod. I walked over, resting both hands on the fence like I had many times before, back when conversations weren't soaked in suspicion. "Wendell?" I nodded. "Looks like your bushes are finally giving up." He chuckled. "Everything gives up eventually. Speaking of, saw Theron yesterday. Looked like he was meeting someone down by First National. Loan office, I think." I didn't blink. "That so?" Wendell scratched the back of his neck. "Hope everything's all right. Refinancing ain't what it used to be, especially if the house isn't in his name." I thanked him for the weather update, turned back toward the house, and walked slower than usual. Not because of age, but because every step was a confirmation. By dusk, the clouds hung low like they knew something too. Theron came home a little later than usual. Evadne wasn't with him. I took the opportunity. "Is there anything I should know about the house?" I asked, standing in the doorway to the kitchen where he was pouring a glass of water. He turned, startled. "What? No. Why would you ask that?" I shrugged. "Just had a feeling." He forced a smile. "Everything's fine, Dad. Nothing you need to worry about." I let him sit with that lie for a while, long enough for it to steep. Then I patted the doorway and walked off without another word. That night, I reopened the drawer. I copied the documents, carefully, printed the audio files, labeled the dates. The USB now had 2 folders, one marked Home, the other Evidence. I drove into town just before closing hours and opened a safety deposit box under my full legal name. I added everything. Then, back home, I wrote a letter addressed to my old attorney. "Just in case. They wanted silence," I wrote in the letter. "I'll give them strategy," and I signed it the same way I built this house, firm and final. That night, the rain didn't stop, and neither did my resolve. The following morning, the storm had softened, but left a cold, wet hush across the yard. Drops clung to the porch rail like punctuation marks in a sentence I hadn't finished reading. I stood by the front door as the mail truck rolled past, and the box clicked shut minutes later. Inside the bundle was a white envelope, unsealed, not addressed to me, just Theron Whitlock, printed on a cheap label, like something hastily done at a pharmacy counter. But curiosity didn't open it. Weight did. Inside was a printed PDF, a scan of a power of attorney form, my name, my birth date, my signature, only it wasn't mine. They hadn't even bothered to mimic it well. The slant was wrong. The K looped the way Theron used to write his lowercase L's when he was 10. He must have thought I'd never see it, or wouldn't remember what my own name looked like. My stomach curled, like it had swallowed a fist. The silence in the house grew heavier with each page I flipped. I wasn't confused, I was insulted. It took me 20 minutes to stop shaking. I slid the envelope into a plastic sleeve and placed it in the drawer beneath the deed. But I didn't sit. I stood in the hallway, the hearing aid warm in my ear. Recording again. Evadne was on the phone in the kitchen. She hadn't seen me yet. "Yep," Brenda confirmed. "Once the notary verifies it, we're all set. He'll never know what hit him. Old men don't check PDFs." She laughed, light and smug. The kind of laugh that didn't belong in a house built with calloused hands and midnight oil. I leaned against the hallway wall, hidden behind the coat rack. Every syllable, every pause, captured. Later that morning, I did something mundane. I vacuumed. I always do on Thursdays, not because the carpet needs it, but because it's mine. Control, even if it's overdust. I moved the couch and spotted something small on the floor. A business card. Brenda H. Langley, Estate Law. It read in a polished serif. The logo was sleek, impersonal, like the kind of place where lives get divided into assets. I searched her name on my phone. Her office was 2 blocks from my bank. I didn't call. I walked. By midday, I stood at her front desk, hat in hand, pretending to be an old man confused by his own paperwork. "I just wanted to follow up on the papers," I said, voice gentle, measured. The receptionist motioned me in. Mrs. Langley herself greeted me, slightly puzzled but polite. "I believe your son handled most of the correspondence," she said, pulling up a file. "Right," I nodded. I just wanted to get your card, in case I need to call directly. She handed it over without suspicion. Her eyes didn't ask questions, but mine did. Back home, I climbed the stairs slower than usual, not from fatigue, but from weight. I unlocked the drawer again, placed the forged form in a new envelope, wrote on it, "For my lawyer, only if I'm gone." My hand hesitated before sealing it. "You raise your kids with both hands," I muttered aloud. "You don't expect one of them to hold a pen while the other steals." They wanted me erased. They'd learn what it feels like to be exposed. Some memories hurt, others protect. Mine were about to do both. The morning sun hadn't yet broken through the thick clouds. The air outside stirred the leaves in anxious circles. Inside, the kitchen was too quiet for comfort. I reached for the coffee tin, same as always. But this time, Evadne appeared beside me like a shadow. She handed me a small white pill bottle. No label. "You forgot to take this yesterday. Remember?" she said. Voice calm as tea cooling in the cup. I looked at the bottle, turned it slowly in my hand. No pharmacy name, no dosage, no signature, just white plastic, blank and forgettable. "I don't recall any doctor giving me this," I said. Neutral. Her smile didn't waver. "It's just a vitamin. Your memory's been a bit inconsistent. Dad." I nodded slowly, pocketed the bottle, and poured my coffee. The bitter steam gave me time to think. Later that morning, I sat on the porch pretending to read the paper. She joined me briefly to mention something trivial about recycling. I waited until she left before rising, walking inside, and checking my pocket again. Still there, still blank. I didn't take it. Mid-morning, I brought up the bank meeting. "I had an appointment today at the branch," I said. "Need to update a few things." Evadne, without missing a beat, replied, "That was last week, Dad. You already went, remember?" I watched her closely. "No, I'm sure it was today." She tilted her head. "You said the same thing 2 days ago, that you were going. We even talked about it after dinner. You were confused then, too." There it was, calm, practiced, weaponized empathy. She patted my hand, then turned back to folding kitchen towels. I almost admired her dedication to the lie. Almost. By noon. I called the bank from the garage, quiet enough not to echo through the vents. After the usual identity checks, I asked about my appointment. "Yes, sir," the manager said. "It was canceled 2 days ago by someone who said they were your authorized contact." I clenched the phone harder. Did they request any changes? "They initiated a transfer request on one of your joint accounts, but it was flagged. We paused it, pending in-person verification." Then came the pause. "Mr. Whitlock, are you safe?" I could have cried at that, but I didn't. "I am." "Thank you," I said, voice steady. "I'll be coming in soon, personally." After hanging up, I walked to the other side of town and entered a different branch, one they didn't know I used. The air smelled of pine cleaner and ink. I met with a younger teller named Claire, who offered me tea while she helped me open a new safety deposit box. Only my name on the access. I placed inside a sealed manila envelope with duplicates of my will, house deed, the recordings, and the forged PDF. "Take your time," Claire said kindly as I signed the paperwork. I did. I watched my hand as I wrote my name, firm, intentional. My hand had built houses, cradled newborns, and buried love. Today, it wrote protection. Back home, Tyler passed me in the hallway with a quiet, "Hey, Grandpa." His eyes lingered longer than usual. I nodded, unsure what he knew, if anything. That night, we sat down for dinner. The wind pushed against the windows like it wanted in. Evadne served a strange stew, root vegetables and something beige. She sat next to Theron, who looked tired, maybe even guilty. Halfway through the meal, she said it casually, over a sip of water. "Dad's memory's been a little off lately, hasn't it?" Theron glanced at her, then at me. He nodded slowly, uncomfortable. I didn't blink. Instead, I raised my glass, smiled softly, and said, "Funny, I remember everything. Their forks paused. Even the wind seemed to hush. And tomorrow, you both will too. The night air pressed against the windows like a silent witness, just as it had the night before. But tonight, it would not be silence that filled this house. Tonight, the walls would echo with truth. I stood at the head of the table in what used to be my dining room. The same oak table where Maeve once served roast on Sundays. Now, it was polished like a showroom floor, cold, sterile, claimed. Theron sat across from me, his face unreadable, arms folded, Evadne to his right, a practiced smile on her lips, wineglass untouched but nearby like a prop. Maddie, our granddaughter, sat between them, legs swinging under the table, a coloring book forgotten beside her plate. "Thanks for joining me," I said, easing into the chair I hadn't occupied in months. "Thought it was time we all had a talk." Evadne gave a light laugh. "Of course, Dad. You sounded so serious earlier." "I am." I looked at each of them. "Anything you want to share before we begin?" They exchanged glances. Theron shrugged. Maddie looked at her mother, confused. "No? Then I will." I reached under my coat and placed a small, worn cassette recorder on the table, the kind with big red buttons and a faint rattle inside from years of drawer sleep. Evadne's smile twitched. I pressed play. At first, just static. Then, her voice, clear as day. "Once the POA clears, we can refinance the whole thing. He won't know a thing." Maddie stopped swinging her legs. Theron blinked. Evadne sat up straighter. "This is ridiculous." The tape continued. "He's still so old-fashioned, writing everything by hand. He won't check a PDF if it smacked him in the face." Theron's jaw clenched. Maddie looked down. Evadne reached across the table. Fast, but not fast enough. I slid the recorder toward me, hand steady. "Is that your voice?" I asked, quietly. She hesitated. "You've clearly edited something." "Is that your voice?" I repeated, colder. "I was worried about you," she said, exasperated now. "Your memory's been all over the place. We were trying to protect you." "From whom?" I asked. "Or from what I might still know?" Theron leaned forward. "Wait, did you cancel Dad's accounts?" She turned to him, defensive rising. "We discussed it." "That's not what I asked." Her voice sharpened. "You weren't complaining when it meant we could cover Maddie's tuition and the renovation." His chair scraped slightly. "You never said we'd be forging signatures." Silence followed like a second skin. I cleared my throat. "Maddie?" She looked up, eyes wide. "Yes. Grandpa?" "Do you remember hearing Mommy talking on the phone about Grandpa's money?" Evadne's hand reached out instinctively. Too late. Maddie nodded. "Yeah. Mommy said you don't need all that stuff now. That it should be moved." Theron slumped back. Evadne's eyes flared. I looked at Maddie gently. "Thank you, sweetheart." Evadne turned on her husband. "You're seriously believing a child's version of things now?" "She doesn't know how to lie yet," I said. For a moment, no one spoke. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows, as if nature itself approved the interruption. Theron pushed back his chair and stood. He didn't look at anyone as he walked away. Evadne watched him go, face blank. Then she turned to me, and something cracked behind her eyes. Not sorrow, loss of control. I didn't speak, just met her gaze and held it. "You wanted me silent," I said at last, voice low, steady. "Now you'll hear everything I never said." The kitchen felt too quiet, even for a house that had long stopped echoing with laughter. I sat at the breakfast table, my hand wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. Across from me, the second chair remained empty, no rustle of a newspaper being shared, no clink of Maeve's silver spoon tapping the rim of a teacup. The clock ticked. I unfolded the paper, more out of habit than interest, headlines blurred. Somewhere behind my eyes, the memory of last night replayed. Theron's silent retreat, Evadne's glare, Maddie's small voice cutting through years of noise. My chest didn't ache anymore. It felt released, like a knot had loosened, but not enough to fall apart. Mid-morning light crept through the window blinds when I heard the back door creak. I didn't turn right away. The footsteps were measured, unsure. Theron cleared his throat. "Mind if I sit?" I nodded toward the chair he hadn't used in months. He lowered himself into it slowly. His eyes were bloodshot. Not from drink, I could tell, but from reckoning. "I'm not here to defend anything," he said. I needed to see you." I waited. "I don't know who to believe anymore," he admitted. "You, Evadne, myself. But I know I've been distant, worse than that." "You have," I replied. He nodded, took a breath. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. Just time." I looked at him then. Really looked. The boy who used to shadow me in the garage was still in there somewhere, just quieter now. Weathered. "Just don't take too long deciding," I said. He nodded again, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was a start. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the magnolia tree, I heard a small tap at the back screen door. When I opened it, Maddie stood there, hands clasped behind her back, pink sneakers covered in dirt. "Hi, Grandpa?" she said softly. I smiled. "You sneak out? Pumpkin?" She nodded. "Mom's on the phone." She didn't see. "Well, you better make this visit count then." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made you something." Unfolding it, I saw a drawing of two stick figures standing among rows of bright green, our garden, from months ago. One of them had gray squiggles for hair and was holding a watering can. The other, shorter, had a wide smile. Above them, written in purple crayon, "Best Grandpa." My throat tightened. "I don't like it when Mommy yells," she whispered. I knelt down to her level. "Sometimes grown-ups forget how to use gentle voices." She nodded. "But I remember your voice. It's soft." That broke me a little. We sat on the porch steps, side by side, her little shoulder leaning against mine. She didn't ask questions. Neither did I. Some moments don't need fixing. The next morning, I drove to the notary's office, a gray building tucked between a bakery and a barber shop. The lawyer I'd called ahead was already waiting with a folder in hand. Inside were the documents finalizing the trust. I read every line, slower than usual, not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to feel the weight of each word. The trust bypassed Evadne entirely. The house, my accounts, my heirlooms, everything was now bound legally to Maddie, with Theron named custodian, pending certain ethical stipulations. A clause that stated clearly, any violation of care, manipulation, or financial abuse would trigger automatic reallocation to a charitable foundation in Maeve's name. The notary slid the document toward me. I signed my name. Slow and firm, for once. My hands didn't shake. Back home. The sun had begun to dip again when I placed the sealed envelope on the mantel. No confrontation, no grand speech, just words on paper. Truth set to ink. Sometimes, what you don't say speaks louder than rage. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey and stood by the window, the drawing Maddie made propped up against the glass beside me. Then came the knock. It wasn't a family knock, not neighborly either, just heavy enough to carry trouble. The knock had weight, not frantic, not neighborly, just deliberate. I opened the door, expecting maybe the pastor or the mailman. It was Sheriff Dunley, hat in hand, eyes already apologizing before he said a word. "Mornin', Orrin." "Mornin', Clay." He cleared his throat. "Got something here you'll want to see." He handed me a sealed envelope, the kind stamped with county ink and legal warnings in bold, the kind that doesn't come unless something's gone sideways. I didn't open it right away, just looked him in the eye. "This about Evadne?" He hesitated. "There's been a formal report filed, questioning your mental fitness." I raised an eyebrow. "She's alleging memory loss, confusion, said she's worried about your ability to handle affairs." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the irony had a flavor I couldn't ignore. She ever mention I got my hearing back? Clay shook his head. Figures. He scratched the back of his neck. Protocol says I gotta inform you. You're not under arrest. Nothing criminal. But the trust, your recent filings, they may come under legal review. I nodded. I'll come by the station, make it official. He looked relieved. Appreciate that. Oren, truly. By late morning, I sat in the station's back room, a cup of weak coffee on the table and a printed complaint in my hand, black ink on white paper. Mr. Whitlock has displayed signs of confusion. He forgets recent conversations. He's been hiding the extent of his condition. Signed by Evadne Crow. I read it twice, then a third time, slower. The part that stung wasn't the accusation, it was how calculated it was. Each word carefully chosen to sound concerned, to sound loving. A snake doesn't hiss when it's smiling. Clay came back with a junior clerk who handed me a consent form to acknowledge the review. I'll sign, I said calmly. Nothing to hide. Clay gave me a half smile. Knew you'd say that. An hour later, I sat in my living room when the phone rang. Caller ID, Durham Law. Mr. Whitlock. Miss Durham's voice was brisk but respectful. I reviewed the complaint. The sheriff's office has to notify the probate court. That means the trust may be temporarily frozen. I exhaled. Of course it is. However, she continued, Evadne's previous signature on the prenuptial agreement may work in our favor. If she was never a legal heir to your estate, her standing to challenge the trust could be invalidated altogether. That caught my attention. I'll need the original prenup, she said, and any records that prove she was aware of your estate planning over the years. I paused. I've got receipts. Literally. She chuckled. Then we might just stay ahead of this storm. After the call, I stepped outside to clear my head. The breeze had picked up. Leaves swirled across the porch like they were trying to say something. That's when I heard a small voice behind me. Grandpa? I turned. Maddie stood barefoot, hair tousled, hugging her favorite stuffed dog. Mom says you're in trouble. I crouched down slowly. You worried? She nodded. Are you going to jail? That question lodged itself deeper than I expected. No, sweetheart, I said, brushing hair from her cheek. Only bad people run from truth. I won't. She looked at me for a long moment, then whispered, I believe you. My throat tightened. I pulled her close. After she went back inside, I sat alone on the porch. No sounds but the wind and my own breath. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't about evening scores. It was protection of what mattered, of who would come after me, of the values Maeve and I built this home on. I leaned back in the rocker, watching the sun inch past the edge of the roof. My fingers rested on the armrest, worn smooth by time. That's when I noticed the mail flag had been lowered. I walked to the box, expecting a flyer or bill. Instead, I found an envelope. Yellowed edges, old script, my name written in ink that had faded. Return address, Michigan. The sender's name stopped my breath. Samuel Whitlock, my brother, the one I hadn't heard from in over 40 years. The envelope lay where I'd left it on the table, unopened, its weight growing heavier each time I looked at it. The handwriting on the front hadn't changed in over 40 years. Samuel's bold cursive always leaned slightly to the left, like he was pulling away from something even as he wrote it down. My hands trembled as I slit the top with my letter opener. The paper inside was brittle at the folds. Tucked neatly in the crease was a photo. I recognized the three faces instantly. Samuel, me, and our father, standing on the front steps of the family farm. That day had been hot as blazes, and the tension between us had crackled like the dry grass underfoot. Beneath the photo, a single line, scribbled in Samuel's familiar scrawl. She knew, she always knew. The silence in the room grew loud. I set the photo aside and sat down slow, letting the memories come, not the polite kind you tell at reunions, but the ones you swallow because they don't sit right. It was 1979. Dad was on his deathbed, and the house smelled of morphine and canned peaches. Jonah, Samuel back then, stood at the foot of the bed, fists clenched. You really gonna let her take it all, Oren? I had no idea what he meant. Dad made his choice. He wanted the land left to Mother's side. That's not the truth, and you know it, Jonah snapped. She pushed him. She pushed every decision he made once he couldn't walk straight. She's our stepmother. Jonah. He trusted her. No, he depended on her, and there's a damn difference. His eyes were red, not from grief, at least not just grief, but something deeper. Betrayal. Fear. Rage that had no place to go. I'm leaving, he said. But mark me, someday, someone's going to pull the same thing, and you'll know how it feels. He left that night, never came back, never called, until now, back in the present. I stared at the firewood stacked by the hearth. I stood, tossed a few logs into the fireplace brace, and struck a match. The flames caught fast, licking the shadows off the walls. I held the letter above the flames for a second too long. My fingers tightened, then I pulled back. Instead, I walked to Maddie's little bookshelf in the corner and slid the letter inside a copy of Charlotte's Web, one she'd insisted on keeping here even though she could recite the whole thing by heart. Just then, her tiny feet padded in. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Can't sleep?" I asked. Soft. She shook her head and leaned against my leg. We didn't speak for a while, just watched the fire. Later that night, once she was tucked in again, I dialed the number scribbled on the envelope's return address. It rang longer than expected. Then a voice, hoarser than I remembered, answered. "Hello?" "It's me," I said. "It's Orrin." Silence. A breath. Then, "Took you long enough." "You were right," I said. "I need to hear the rest." Another pause. "I'll come. End of the week. You better be ready, Orrin. I've been holding this a long time." "I'm ready." Click. I sat there in the dark, the receiver still warm in my hand. I wasn't sure if I felt dread or relief. Maybe both. For most of my life, I believed betrayal was something that happened in the moment, a sharp thing, like a knife to the ribs. But what if it was slower, older? What if it trickled down, generation to generation, buried in paper trails and whispered decisions? I walked back to the study. My desk was cluttered with old bills and unopened mail. Something nudged at me to sort through it, and that's when I found it. Maeve's journal, leather-bound, worn at the corners, hidden beneath an envelope of outdated insurance forms. I hadn't touched it since the week she passed. I ran my hand along the spine. My pulse quickened. I whispered to no one. I should have read this years ago, but maybe the truth waited for me to be ready. The candle flickered beside me, casting a soft, trembling glow over the old leather journal. Rain tapped against the window like fingers hesitant to knock. I traced the faded embossing with the back of my finger. Maeve's initials, still clear after all these years. Her handwriting had always calmed me, even in the worst of times. Her script was patient, thoughtful, never rushed. Now, sitting in my study while the house creaked with wind and memory, I opened the cover with something between reverence and dread. October 3rd, 1987. The first page began. Theron's mood is different lately. Evadne smiles too sweetly. I turned each page slowly. The ink smudged in places where time or perhaps a tear had blurred the lines. Maeve wrote about Evadne's growing presence, how she redirected conversations, how she flattered the right people but turned cold behind closed doors. "I don't trust the way she looks at Orrin," one entry read. "Not in the way a daughter-in-law ought to. There's calculation there." Farther in, a page stopped me cold. March 12th, 1995. I met with my lawyer today. I didn't tell Orrin, not yet. I love him, but he trusts too easily, especially when it comes to keeping peace. My hand stiffened. The candle bent slightly in a draft. Taped to the inside of the journal's final page was a yellowed envelope with my name written in Maeve's careful print. To be opened only by Orrin. My breath caught as I peeled the flap open. Inside was a notarized document. A revised will, dated May 1995. It left everything, our home, the accounts, even the land, to Maddie. Not Owen, not Evadne, just Maddie, under the clause that she be raised with compassion, not entitlement. Maeve had known. She'd seen it coming long before I ever heard it in Evadne's voice. I'd ignored her instincts, brushed off her concerns as overprotective worry. And now, the consequences were clear, spelled out in legal ink and a dead woman's faith in a little girl's heart. I placed the will down and stood slowly. The air around me felt heavier, tighter. My mouth dried as guilt rose like bile. I remembered how often Maeve had tried to start conversations I'd dodged, how many warnings I waved away because I didn't want to stir the pot. I stared out the window. Lightning etched the yard in brief flashes. The door creaked behind me. "Grandpa?" Maddie stood in the doorway, blanket in hand, hair a mess of sleepy curls. I wiped my face quickly and turned. "Can't sleep?" I asked. She shook her head, crossing the room. "Can I stay here?" I didn't answer at first, just opened my arms. She crawled up beside me, curled against my chest. "You smell like cinnamon," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "Your grandma used to say the same." We sat in silence, her breathing settling into a rhythm that softened the edges of everything else. Later, once she'd fallen asleep, I carried her back to bed and pulled the door shut gently behind me. Then I picked up the phone. The number still worked. I called Thomas Belgrave, the lawyer who'd helped Maeve draft her will nearly 30 years ago. It rang twice before a voice, old but alert, answered. "Belgrave residence. Tom, it's Orrin Whitlock." A pause. "Orrin? Well, I'll be. What can I do for you?" "I need to reactivate a document. A will. Maeve's. She'd left instructions. I never destroyed it." "Good. I want it filed." "You sure?" I looked back at the envelope, still open on the desk. "They'll hear it from the judge, not from me." Sunday came with a clear sky and a sharp breeze. I put on my best coat and polished shoes. Maddie skipped beside me as we walked into church. People stared. I held my head up. It wasn't pride. It was purpose. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind in dollars. It's about leaving the right truth in the right hands. I glanced down at Maddie's fingers laced in mine, then up toward the cross at the altar. You don't win battles like these by yelling. You win them by standing still, long enough for the truth to rise.